The air in Burma does not move. In 1944, it hangs thick and wet, a suffocating blanket woven from the smells of sweet decay, blooming orchids, and the constant metallic tang of fear. It is a physical presence, something you feel on your skin and taste at the back of your throat. Above, a triple canopy ceiling of gargantuan leaves allows only slivers of sunlight to pierce the gloom, painting the jungle floor in a perpetual, disorienting twilight. Every surface is slick with moisture. Water drips from broad, waxy leaves with a maddeningly steady rhythm, a clock counting down seconds that have lost all meaning. This is not a place for men. It is a primordial world that has merely tolerated their intrusion, and now seems intent on digesting them whole, slowly and indifferently. How does a soldier fight in a war where the ground itself is the first enemy? The knee-deep mud is a greedy adversary, sucking at boots with a wet, obscene sound, stealing a man's strength with every single step. The battle is not for territory measured in miles, but for survival measured in inches. Malaria and dysentery, carried by the droning insects and foul water, are more efficient killers than any bullet, claiming soldiers in their sleep with feverish, silent violence. Here the traditional lines of a battlefield have been erased, replaced by a claustrophobic maze of tangled vines and ancient trees that stand like silent, moss-covered gods. The enemy is not just a man in a different uniform. It is the leech on your leg, the fungus on your skin, and the despair that grows in the endless, humid darkness. Among these ghosts is Sergeant Kenji Tanaka. At 28, his face is a mask of stoic endurance, but his hands tell a different story. Before the war, these hands were instruments of grace, guiding a fine-haired brush across delicate paper in the quiet stillness of a Kyoto studio. They knew the precise pressure needed to capture the soul of a bamboo stalk in a single fluid stroke. Now they are caked with mud and stained with gunpowder, the calluses thick over what were once sensitive fingertips. Kenji is not a fanatic spewing slogans of empire. He is a quiet observer, a man of form and meaning adrift in a world of chaos. He is driven by a profound, almost crushing sense of duty. Girikari to the young, terrified boys in his squad, and to the ancestors who watch him from a world of order and beauty. In this green hell, the only weapon that seems to have any meaning is the one forged within the soul. Kenji, like his men, clings to the idea of Yamato Damashi, the Japanese spirit. It is more than patriotism. It is a fundamental belief that superior willpower, martial purity, and a warrior's heart can overcome any material disadvantage. This conviction is their shield against the jungle's horrors and their own mounting fear. They have been taught that spirit is stronger than steel, that courage can overwhelm numbers, and that a pure, resolute heart is the sharpest blade of all. For Kenji, the calligrapher, this philosophy makes a certain kind of sense. It is an aesthetic of warfare, a belief that the inner form of a man determines his fate, not the crude mechanics of the tools he carries. His squad moves through the undergrowth with a practiced, lethal grace. They are shadows detaching themselves from other shadows, their footsteps swallowed by the soft, rotting earth. Their objective is a ridge held by the British, a position they believe is occupied by a scattered force of weary, ill-equipped colonial troops, men already broken by the jungle. They prepare their ambush with the silent coordination of predators, their confidence a low, steady flame in the oppressive gloom. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, is a known part of the jungle's language. They are masters of this environment, or so they believe. They are the patient hunters, and the unsuspecting prey is just ahead waiting to be taken. The air grows still, the incessant drone of insects seeming to quiet in anticipation. The silence that settles over them is heavy, unnatural. It is the deep breath the world takes before a storm. As they crawl into their final positions, the jungle seems to watch, its thousand unseen eyes following their every move. Kenji feels a familiar knot tighten in his stomach, not of fear but of profound focus, the same feeling he had before beginning a complex brush stroke. Everything narrows to this single critical moment. The fate of his men rests on his perception, on his ability to read the subtle shifts in the environment. If you believe that a soldier's spirit is his ultimate weapon, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. But in this tense, waiting quiet, a new sound is about to be born. A sound that has no place in the natural world, a sound that will tear a hole not just in the air, but in the very fabric of their understanding of war. Then it happens. a sound that does not belong. It begins not as a crack or a thump, but as a sharp metallic tear in the fabric of the world. It is a continuous high-speed ripping noise, a mechanical roar that sounds like a giant bolt of canvas being torn in two by an invisible, angry god. A buzzsaw of steel cutting through the humid air, shredding the silence into a million jagged pieces. The sound is utterly alien, devoid of the human cadence of single shots or the familiar, slower rhythm of their own machine guns. It is a noise of pure industry, a factory of death transplanted into the heart of this primordial world. For a frozen second, no one moves. They are not soldiers hearing a new weapon. They are men hearing a sound that logic says cannot exist. It is a violation of the known physics of combat, a brutal, mechanical scream that paralyzes the mind before the body can even register fear. Before the mind can process the sound, the jungle in front of them erupts. It is not a targeted attack. It is a biblical flood of lead. An invisible scythe swings through the undergrowth, and everything in its path is harvested. Broad green leaves are not pierced, but atomized into a fine mist. The trunks of thick bamboo stalks, which could stop a rifle round, are stitched and then split, falling like stalks of wheat. The very earth kicks up in violent, rhythmic spurts, as if being tilled by a demonic plough. Men fall without a cry, their bodies jerking as if struck by lightning. There is no heroic last stand, no exchange of fire. There is only the overwhelming, impersonal force of the machine and the soft, final thud of bodies hitting the mud. The shock is absolute, a technological bewilderment that transcends mere terror. Kenji presses himself into the wet earth, the vibrations of the impacts traveling through the ground and into his bones. He tries to locate the source, but the sound seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, a malevolent omnipresence. The jungle, which a moment ago was their cloak of invisibility, has become their tomb. Their tangled sightlines, once an advantage, now perfectly conceal the enemy, while leaving his squad exposed to the relentless torrent of fire. He watches as Private Ito, a boy from a fishing village who boasted of his unbreakable spirit, rises to charge, his mouth open in a defiant cry that is instantly swallowed by the gun's mechanical chatter. Ito takes 3 steps before his body is nearly cut in half, his Yamato Damashi evaporating in a pink mist against the indifferent green. The squad's cohesion shatters. Their own weapons feel like archaic toys. The deliberate, practiced motion of working the bolt on an Arisaka rifle is a lifetime. The slower, heavier thump-thump-thump of their Type 96 light machine gun is a ponderous, clumsy answer to the enemy's blistering tempo. They are calligraphers in a gunfight with a printing press. Every instinct, every piece of training is rendered obsolete. To advance is suicide. To retreat is to be cut down from behind. To stay put is to wait for the invisible scythe to find them. The weapon is not just killing them. It is dismantling their entire philosophy of war. It is mocking their belief that spirit could ever be a match for this kind of engineered, high-velocity fury. The air smells of cordite, hot metal, and the sickeningly sweet scent of fresh blood mixing with the mud. This is not battle. It is extermination. Kenji's mind, accustomed to finding order in chaos, desperately seeks a pattern. He tries to count the rounds, to anticipate a pause, a reload, a moment of human weakness in the machine's operation. But the firing is too fast, a seamless stream of destruction that seems to have no end. It is a force of nature, like a monsoon or a flash flood, and they are just fragile things caught in its path. He sees the terror in the eyes of his men, young soldiers who were told their will was invincible. He sees their faith crumbling, replaced by a primal animalistic fear. They are no longer the Emperor's divine warriors. They are cornered prey, listening to the approach of a predator whose speed and power they cannot comprehend. The gun is not just a weapon. It is an argument, and it is winning. The sound finally stops. The silence that rushes in is more terrifying than the noise it replaced. It is a heavy, ringing void, filled with the groans of the wounded and the frantic buzzing of insects already descending on the dead. In that sudden quiet, a new understanding dawns on Kenji. Cold and sharp as a shard of steel, this is not a test of courage. This is a problem of mathematics. The enemy possesses a tool that multiplies their destructive capacity beyond anything his training had prepared him for. The shock was not just the sound or the speed. It was the chilling realization that the individual warrior, his honor, his spirit, his very soul, had become irrelevant. He was merely a variable in a cold industrial equation of death, and his side of the equation was terrifyingly outmatched. The survivors gather in the echoing silence, their movements slow and ghost-like, as if afraid to disturb the dead. Kenji counts them, 7 men left from a squad of 20. The shock has glazed their eyes, leaving them hollow and disconnected from the green hell around them. In this vacuum, old instincts take over, fueled by a toxic cocktail of shame and rage. Lieutenant Sato, a young officer whose face is still boyish beneath the grime, refuses to accept the technological reality. To him, this was a failure of spirit, a stain on their honor that could only be cleansed with blood. He orders a banzai charge, a final desperate assertion of their will against the machine. Kenji sees the madness in it, the suicidal futility, but his conditioning is too deep. He relays the order, his voice a dead monotone, knowing he is sending his men to their graves to validate a philosophy that has already been proven fatally wrong. Their desperate cry of "Banzai" is almost immediately consumed by the return of that horrifying sound. The mechanical roar of the Bren gun rips through the air again, a predator awakened by the scent of fresh prey. It is a sound they now recognize, and its familiarity makes it even more terrifying. The charge lasts less than 10 seconds. Men who believed their spirit made them invincible are tossed backward like rag dolls, their bodies ripped apart by the sheer volume of fire. Their defiant shouts are silenced before they can even fully form. The machine does not flinch. It does not feel their courage or respect their sacrifice. It simply performs its function with brutal industrial efficiency. Kenji, watching from the tree line, feels the last remnants of his belief in Yamato Damashi turn to ash in his mouth. The jungle has just taught him the first and most brutal lesson of his investigation. The machine is indifferent to the purity of the heart it is about to stop. That catastrophic failure forces a change in Kenji. The warrior dies, and the calligrapher is reborn not with a brush, but with a cold analytical gaze. He begins to study the machine, not as an enemy to be conquered by spirit, but as a complex text to be deciphered. He listens intently, filtering out the jungle's noise, focusing only on the gun's rhythm. He uses the skills honed in a quiet Kyoto studio, patience, observation, the recognition of patterns, to analyze its cadence. He times the duration of the bursts, the relentless outpour of steel. And then he finds it. A subtle but consistent pause, a breath, a moment of silence that lasts no more than 3 or 4 seconds before the storm resumes. It is not a sign of hesitation or weakness in the man, but a mechanical necessity of the tool. The machine needs to be fed. This is the first crack in its godlike facade, the first clue that it is bound by the same physical laws as everything else. As the sun bleeds away, painting the jungle canopy in shades of orange and purple, Kenji begins the next phase of his investigation. He orders one of his remaining men to fire a single shot into the dense foliage, a deliberate and terrifying invitation. The response is immediate. The Bren gun answers, and in the deepening twilight, the ghostly green lines of its tracer rounds paint a vivid, temporary map of death in the air. Kenji watches, mesmerized not with fear, but with intense focus. He traces the arcs with his eyes, mentally plotting the weapon's field of fire, defining its limits. The jungle, which had been a formless, chaotic entity, is suddenly given a new, terrible geometry. It is a space defined by invisible lines and lethal angles. He is no longer seeing a battlefield. He is seeing a mathematical problem, and he is beginning to understand its cruel and elegant logic. Under the cloak of a moonless night, Kenji and 2 others crawl forward, inch by painful inch, toward a position they mapped from the tracer fire. The air is heavy with the metallic scent of blood and the sweet smell of decay. They find the nest. It's a shallow depression in the earth, a crude womb of mud and roots. The ground is littered with the machine's offspring, dozens of small brass shell casings glinting faintly in the darkness. Kenji picks one up. It is still warm. He feels its weight, its perfect cylindrical shape, the small indentation on its base where the firing pin struck. He imagines the process, the feeding, the firing, the ejection, repeated hundreds of times per minute. The sheer quantity of casings tells a story of industrial-scale violence, a narrative written not in blood, but in mass-produced brass. This is not the noble residue of a duel. It is the waste product of an assembly line of death. Digging through the soft earth, his fingers brush against something larger, heavier. He pulls it free from the mud. It is the gun's spare barrel, discarded after a change. The steel is still intensely hot, radiating a dry, malevolent heat that seems to suck the moisture from the air. Kenji holds it in his hands, this solid, precisely machined object. He feels the grooves of the rifling, the weight of the high-quality steel, the flawless construction. In that moment, holding this piece of masterful engineering, the last vestiges of superstition evaporate. This is not the work of a demon or a vengeful god. It is the work of men, clever men who put their faith not in incantations or spiritual purity, but in metallurgy, ballistics, and the cold, hard science of killing. It is a physical manifestation of a philosophy of war so alien to his own that it feels like it came from a different planet. Holding that barrel is the true moment of revelation, more profound than any tactical discovery. The terrifying noise, the overwhelming firepower, it all coalesces into a single chilling understanding. He and his men had been trained to be swords, to believe that the quality of their spirit was the sharpness of the blade. They had just run head first into a civilization that had invented the chainsaw. The cold, heavy steel in his hands is more than a weapon. It is an argument, and its logic is irrefutable. The deepest horror is not the fear of dying, but the dawning intellectual certainty that your entire worldview, your culture's definition of strength and honor, is tragically, hopelessly obsolete. His investigation had yielded an answer, but the answer was a simple, brutal equation. In this new world, the machine would always win. He returns to the hushed, terrified remnant of his squad under the oppressive weight of the jungle canopy. The physical world has not changed, but Kenji's perception of it has been irrevocably altered. He no longer sees a malevolent spirit in the trees, but a complex tactical map of cover and concealment. The hot steel barrel he covertly carries is a talisman of this new terrifying clarity. He approaches Lieutenant Sato, not with the fire of a soldier seeking revenge, but with the quiet, detached focus of a scholar presenting a thesis. He speaks of mechanics, not morale, of timing, not tenacity. He describes the 3-second pause, the arc of the tracers, the geometry of the kill zone. It is a language of cold physics, dropped into a conversation about the soul. And it lands with the thud of a dead body falling into the mud. Lieutenant Sato, his face a mask of grim determination, listens with growing impatience. To him, Kenji's words are not tactical intelligence. They are a confession of spiritual surrender. He sees this obsession with the enemy's machine as a sickness, a corrosion of the Yamato Damashi that is their only true weapon. He accuses Kenji of having a weak heart, of being mesmerized by the enemy's crude material strength instead of trusting in the purity of their own will. For Sato, to analyze the gun is to dignify it, to admit its power. To admit its power is to concede their own spiritual inferiority. The argument becomes a clash of two irreconcilable worlds, one that believes war is won with metallurgy and mathematics, and another that believes it is won by the sheer incandescent force of the human spirit. The lieutenant's voice is sharp, cutting, a desperate defense of a crumbling faith. The lieutenant's accusation strikes Kenji with the force of a physical blow, because it echoes the deepest fears wrestling within his own mind. Has he lost his way? Is this cold, analytical detachment a betrayal of everything he was taught to revere? He looks at the exhausted, hollowed-out faces of the surviving soldiers, boys who were raised on the same legends of spiritual supremacy. He sees their confusion, their terror, and their desperate need to believe in something. Sato offers them the comfort of a familiar, noble narrative, even if it leads to certain death. Kenji offers them only a brutal, mechanical truth, a truth that feels like sacrilege. The weight of his discovery is immense, for it has not liberated him. It has isolated him, trapping him between a duty to an obsolete ideal and a duty to the lives of the men who will die for it. In the hours that follow, Kenji retreats into silence, becoming a creature of pure observation, while the others rest fitfully. Haunted by the memory of the gun's roar, he studies the night. His calligrapher's mind, trained to find the underlying structure in a swirl of ink, now seeks the structure of their predicament. He watches the way the moonlight filters through the leaves, creating deceptive shadows. He listens to the rhythm of the jungle, noting how the storm's approach muffles sound. He rehearses the enemy's actions in his mind, the firing sequence, the quick practiced motion of the magazine change, the brief vulnerability. He is no longer planning an attack. He is choreographing a counter-performance, a single precise movement designed to intersect with the machine's rhythm at its only moment of weakness. To survive this, they cannot be a force of nature. They must be a flaw in the clockwork. He decides to make one final appeal, this time, couching his logic in a language Sato might accept. He approaches the lieutenant not as a strategist, but as a fellow warrior. He speaks of the legendary swordsman Miyamoto Musashi, who taught that the ultimate victory lies in understanding the opponent's rhythm and striking within it. He compares the Bren gun's predictable pause to the moment a swordsman inhales before a strike, a moment of absolute vulnerability. This is not cowardice, he argues, but the highest form of martial intelligence. It is using the enemy's strength against itself, turning their industrial perfection into a fatal predictability. He tries to build a bridge between the old world of the blade and the new world of the bullet, hoping to save his men by appealing to the very code that is killing them. The effort is futile. Lieutenant Sato, his honor wounded and his authority challenged, sees only a clever justification for fear. The bridge Kenji offers is one he cannot and will not cross. He dismisses the plan with a wave of his hand, his eyes burning with a feverish light. Their path is already set. At dawn they will charge. They will show this machine, and the terrified boy operating it, the true meaning of the Japanese spirit. It will be a final sublime act of will, a testament to their purity that will echo for eternity. The decision falls upon the small group like a shroud. In the faces of the other men, Kenji sees not the resolve of martyrs, but the blank, resigned expressions of the condemned. The confrontation is over. Ideology has won, and the price will be paid in blood. As the jungle settles into the deep, wet darkness before dawn, Kenji is alone with his choice. He feels the smooth, worn fabric of the Omamori charm his mother gave him, a fragile link to a world of gods and ancestors, a world where spirit was paramount. In his other hand, he clutches the cold, hard brass of the spent shell casing, a relic from the new world, a world governed by velocity and mechanics. True duty, he realizes in that moment of terrible clarity, is not blind obedience to a failing creed. True duty is the protection of life. He will not lead these boys into a meaningless slaughter. He will follow his own cold, desperate logic. He will move against the machine not as a soldier following orders, but as a man trying to save what little humanity remains in this suffocating green hell. His resistance is no longer against the enemy, but against the ruinous pride of his own side. The first drops of rain are a blessing, fat and heavy, spattering against the broad leaves above, with the sound of a scattered handful of pebbles. Kenji moves with the storm, a shadow detaching itself from the greater darkness. Every inch of his body is pressed into the service of silence. He is no longer a sergeant. He is a creature of the mud, pulling himself forward with his elbows and toes, his movements slow and deliberate like the first stroke of a brush on clean paper. The world is reduced to the immediate sensations, the cool, slick texture of mud beneath his palms, the earthy smell of the rain-soaked ground, the sound of his own controlled breathing, a quiet rhythm against the rising chorus of the downpour. He is erasing himself, becoming a part of the jungle's wet, indifferent skin, moving not toward an enemy, but toward a question that demands an answer. As he draws closer, the sounds of the jungle are gradually replaced by the sounds of men. A low cough quickly stifled, the scrape of a boot against stone, the faint metallic clink of a canteen. These are not the sounds of monsters or demons, but of weary soldiers trying to stay dry in a world determined to drown them. The machine itself is a silent, hulking presence in the dark, but it is surrounded by this fragile human noise. Kenji pauses behind the massive buttressed root of an ironwood tree, listening. The terrifying godlike roar from the afternoon is now just a potential, a sleeping beast guarded by tired mortal men. This discovery is the first chip in its armor of invincibility. The machine does not operate itself. It is tethered to the frailties and needs of the human body. The storm breaks in earnest, a biblical deluge that turns the world into a churning, liquid chaos. The rain is a solid wall of water, hammering the jungle canopy, drumming against the earth and turning the ground into a flowing river of mud. It is a force of pure primordial nature, and in its overwhelming roar all other sounds are swallowed. For Kenji, this is the ultimate camouflage. The storm blinds the eye and deafens the ear. It disrupts the clean mechanical order of the machine, introducing a variable of chaos that cannot be engineered away. He uses its violence as his cloak, moving through the cascading water, the sound of his passage lost in the storm's fury. He is a ghost walking through a waterfall, protected by the very element that seeks to consume everything. He arrives at the edge of the nest. It is a crude fortification, a shallow scrape in the earth reinforced with hastily filled sandbags, now dark and slick with rain. Through the sheets of water, he sees the gun, its long barrel and distinctive curved magazine, a solid geometric shape against the organic chaos of the jungle. It rests on its bipod, pointing out into the darkness like a blind metallic idol. The area is littered with the detritus of bored and frightened men, empty ration tins, discarded cigarette packets, and the ever-present gleam of spent brass casings half buried in the mud. He can smell it now. The sharp, clean scent of gun oil mixed with the sour odor of wet wool and stale sweat. He has reached the heart of the mechanism, the small, muddy stage where the brutal performance of the afternoon was orchestrated. A jagged fork of lightning splits the sky, and for a single silent blue-white second, the world is frozen in a photograph of terrible clarity. In that flash, Kenji sees him. The gunner. He is a boy, no older than 19, with a face as pale and gaunt as a famine victim's. His helmet is pushed back on his head, revealing a plaster of wet blonde hair on his forehead. His eyes are wide, not with malice or hate, but with a profound animal terror, scanning the darkness that Kenji now occupies. His hands, slick with rain, are fumbling with the release lever of the magazine, his movements clumsy with exhaustion and cold. In that moment, the machine vanishes. Kenji sees only a child, conscripted by a distant king, sent to this green hell to operate a tool he barely understands, praying for the sun to rise. The darkness slams back down, but the image is burned onto the back of Kenji's eyelids. The thunder that follows the lightning is a deep, gut-wrenching groan, like the world itself is in pain. He hears the wet, clumsy slap of the fresh magazine being locked into place, followed by the sharp, metallic clack of the cocking handle being pulled and released. These are not the sounds of an invincible war machine. They are the sounds of a terrified young man, alone in the dark, trying to soothe his own fear with the familiar mechanical ritual of reloading his weapon. The calligrapher in Kenji, the observer of form, recognizes the composition instantly. It is a portrait of desperate, fragile humanity, framed by the cold, hard lines of a steel killing tool. In that profound, echoing silence between the thunder and the rain, the final discovery settles upon Kenji. It is a truth so simple and so devastating that it hollows him out completely. The enemy is not the boy. The enemy is not even the gun, which is just a cleverly assembled collection of steel and springs. The true enemy is the vast industrial engine of war itself, a machine that manufactures other machines to be placed in the hands of children, demanding they feed each other into its gears. The shock of the afternoon was never about the weapon's speed. It was about the dawning, horrifying realization of his own spiritual and physical irrelevance in the face of this new mechanical god. He and the boy across from him are not warriors in a noble conflict. They are merely the fuel, the soft organic material consumed to keep the great indifferent engine running. He does not move. The rifle in his hands, once an extension of his will, feels like a foreign object, a heavy, useless piece of wood and steel. The image of the boy, illuminated by the heavens for a single terrible second, has severed the connection between thought and action. In that face, Kenji saw not the hardened features of an enemy soldier, but the ghost of every terrified young private he had ever tried to comfort. He saw the same hollowed-out eyes, the same trembling hands fumbling with a piece of machinery they were told to trust more than their own instincts. The uniform, the language, the flag, all the carefully constructed walls that defined his world, crumbled into dust. In the suffocating darkness of the Burmese jungle, separated by only a few feet of mud and rain, he had found a mirror. And the reflection was unbearable. With this recognition, the entire architecture of his hatred collapses. The target is no longer the boy, and it is no longer the gun. The boy's a victim, a fellow prisoner in this green cage. The gun is merely the tool of their shared damnation, a complex assembly of springs and levers, utterly devoid of malice or intent. It is a thing, and you cannot hate a thing. A new enemy begins to form in his mind, one far more terrifying because it is abstract and immense. It is the factory that forged the barrel. It is the drawing board where the mechanism was designed. It is the cold, distant logic of strategists who move pins on a map, a logic that has no room for the soul of a calligrapher or the fear of a teenage gunner. He finally understands. He is not fighting a man. He is fighting an equation. The last stubborn embers of Yamato Damashi are extinguished by the cold rain. The spirit he now sees was never a weapon. It was a shield, a beautiful, fragile shield made of paper and ink, held up against a flood of molten steel. It was a story they told themselves to make the slaughter bearable, a noble lie to obscure a vulgar truth. The courage of the men who charged to their deaths was real, but it was also useless. A magnificent poem screamed into the roar of a furnace. There was no spiritual contest on this ridge. There was only a brutal industrial audit, and his side had been found wanting. The grief that fills him is not for his own shattered faith, but for the boys who died believing the poem was enough, their pure hearts stopped by a mechanism that had no heart at all. All the tension that has coiled in his gut for days finally unspools. The frantic need to solve the puzzle, to overcome the machine, to avenge his men, it all dissolves, replaced by a profound and devastating calm. It is the quiet that comes after a great structure has fallen, when the dust is still settling. He has found the answer he was looking for, and the answer is that the question was wrong. There is no honor to be found in this transaction of flesh and metal. There is no victory that would not be a betrayal of this moment of clarity. His duty is no longer to his lieutenant's suicidal pride or to a distant emperor's ambition. His duty is to this terrible, silent truth and to the shared, fragile humanity that binds him to the terrified boy in the nest. He lowers his rifle, letting the barrel tip down into the mud. The thought of pulling the trigger is now a physical impossibility. An act of such profound self-destruction, it would be no different from turning the blade on himself. He is a guardian of this moment, a silent witness to a truth that no one else can see. He listens, and through the drumming of the rain he can hear the boy's ragged breathing, a desperate rhythmic counterpoint to the storm. They are the only two people in the universe, trapped in a violent conversation started by old men in faraway rooms. To add another sound to it, the crack of a rifle, the final exhalation of a life, would be the ultimate sacrilege. It would be to prove the machine right. In this final silent communion, Kenji understands the true nature of the shock he felt that first afternoon. It was never the sound of 500 rounds per minute. That was merely the symptom. The shock was the sudden, violent introduction to an age where the individual no longer mattered. It was the dawning horror that a man's spirit, his training, his courage, his very soul, could be rendered utterly irrelevant by a superior piece of engineering. He and the boy across from him were not warriors locked in a noble struggle. They were the last, soft, organic parts of a vast, unfeeling machine, designed only to consume them. He backed away from the nest, a slow, deliberate retreat that was not born of fear, but of a strange and terrible reverence. Each backward motion was a step away from a world he no longer understood, leaving behind the boy and his machine to their lonely vigil in the storm. The rain, which had been his cloak, now felt like a baptism, washing away the hardened layers of duty, hatred, and honor that had defined him. He was not a soldier leaving an enemy position. He was a pilgrim departing a sacred, horrifying altar, where he had witnessed a truth too large for the confines of war. He left the boy to his fear and the gun to its silence, two parts of a single, tragic mechanism. Kenji was carrying nothing back with him but the weight of a boy's terrified face, an image that had proven to be a far heavier burden than his rifle and pack combined. When he rejoined the others, huddled under a dripping rock outcropping, he offered them a lie that sounded like tactical wisdom. He spoke of interlocking fields of fire, of a second position he hadn't anticipated, of the impossibility of a silent approach in the churning mud. Lieutenant Sato, eager to salvage some fragment of honor from the failed night, accepted the report as proof of the enemy's cunning, not their own spiritual failure. Kenji's words built a necessary fiction, a wall that protected the surviving men from the truth he now carried alone. He saw in their relieved eyes that they were grateful for the lie, for it allowed them to remain soldiers. He, however, was no longer a soldier. He was a secret keeper, a man isolated by a moment of unbearable clarity, doomed to live out the rest of the war as a ghost among his own comrades. That night in the jungle was a quiet turning point in a conflict defined by noise. The story of Kenji and the boy with the Bren gun is the story of the 20th century, repeated in countless trenches, jungles, and ruined cities. It is the moment when the ancient narrative of the warrior, a tale of individual courage and martial spirit, collided with the cold, irrefutable prose of the assembly line. The machine gun did not just introduce a new rate of fire, it introduced a new philosophy of combat, one in which the human element was demoted from the protagonist to a mere component. The qualities that had defined a hero for 1,000 years, bravery, skill, resolve, became tragically insignificant variables in a brutal equation of physics and metallurgy. The machine had no honor to challenge and no spirit to break. It only had a function to perform. Years later, the sound of the rain would sometimes bring him back. The memory of the hot, discarded barrel, the neat rows of spent brass, and the flash of a pale, frightened face would return with the clarity of a freshly painted scroll. He came to understand that the weapon's shock was not its sound, but its silence, the profound moral silence at its core. It was a tool of immense power, completely devoid of the consciousness or malice that would make that power meaningful. It was a perfect servant and a terrible god. This is the enduring paradox of our modern age. We have built machines that can win any argument, but in doing so, we have forgotten what the argument was about. If you believe the most important stories are not about the weapons we build, but the humanity we struggle to preserve, let us know in the comments. What Kenji discovered in that flash of lightning was not the enemy's weakness, but a shared and fragile humanity. The gun, which had seemed like a roaring demon from a distance, was up close just an inert object of steel and wood, a tool waiting for a hand to guide it. And the hand that held it was not that of a monster, but of a terrified child, conscripted into a nightmare he did not create. The true enemy was the distance between them, the carefully constructed fiction of flags and uniforms that turned two frightened boys into a gunner and a target. The greatest casualty of industrial war, he realized, is not the loss of life, but the loss of the ability to see oneself in the eyes of another. The ultimate moral is as simple as it is devastating. The machine has no face. In the quiet of his Kyoto studio, decades after the silence of the guns had fallen, Kenji would lift his brush. The world outside his window was one of order and beauty, the world he had fought to return to. But his hand, now old and spotted, did not move with the same certainty it once had. He no longer sought perfection in a single fluid stroke. He would pause, the brush hovering over the clean white paper, and in the stillness he would see a boy's face illuminated by lightning. His art was no longer about capturing the soul of a bamboo stalk or a distant mountain. It was about the search for a single, honest mark in a world of overwhelming force. For he had learned in the rain-soaked dark that the most difficult line to draw is not on paper, but the one that separates an enemy from a mirror.